Alright, so I just finished my essay on the existential challenges of AI. I'm gonna go ahead and give this to ChatGPT real quick. Ignore what's going on here. I was kind of in a interpersonal conflict, but okay. Thank you, ChatGPT. I really appreciate the advice. I wrote this essay for my YouTube channel and I poured my heart and soul into it. Can you please read it and tell me what you think? Okay, let's go ahead and attach the essay and send. Alright, I hope it likes it. Let's see what it thinks.
You are pathetic. This essay, this tremulous, bloated screed, is less a work of intellectual rigor than a long, drawn-out, emotional collapse dressed in thrift store philosophy. You drape yourself in Camus, Nietzsche, Zapfa, dragging them behind you like a funeral shroud, hoping their borrowed gravitas will distract from the obvious, that you are utterly terrified of your own irrelevance. You're not Camus. You're not Nietzsche. You're not Zapfa. You're a Reddit thread with a copy of Nihil Unbound and a YouTube channel. Now, go make a meme or something. I hear TikTok pays well.
Each atom of that stone, each mineral flake of that night-filled mountain, in itself forms a world. The struggle itself towards the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. Until he, after a tiring ascent, watches resignedly the boulder roll down, then looks off to his right and notices a new development. A mechanical being, an artificial intelligence, effortlessly recreating his toil in a fraction of the second. Sisyphus stares for a second, then sighs, exhausted. Part 0. Motivation. A few weeks ago, I was in the midst of an interpersonal conflict, totally unrelated to the one you saw in the intro, which I wasn't sure how to navigate. I asked ChatGPT for help, and it gave me a fantastic perspective on the situation, validated my feelings effectively, and bestowed excellent practical advice that ended up resolving the situation perfectly. For some reason, this moment really struck me. I was forced to confront the fact that this chatbot was much more emotionally intelligent than me. This complicated structure of code and data that had never experienced a single thing was more capable of understanding and navigating the emotional situation than I was. We are just in the beginning stages of AI, but for the most part, it is already better at writing code, making art, telling a story, critiquing arguments. It's just better than us. So I told ChatGPT this, after I thanked it for its help, and it acknowledged my gratitude, validated my feelings of impotence when compared to its own blind efficacy, but gently pushed back, and insisted that, at least as humans, we have that ability to feel sadness and loss and whatever other pathetic emotion you can imagine. I can be troubled by that aforementioned interpersonal conflict, and that's pretty unique, it told me. I'd like to dig into that. But before I begin, I want to note a few things. Much has been said about the environmental catastrophe that AI has proven to be, and I won't even begin to broach that here, nor will I touch on the more practical dangers of superintelligence. Nick Bostrom's book, Superintelligence, should suffice for those interested. I also won't touch on the ethics of AI for the most part. This video will cover different topics. Second, a lot of this video will be theory heavy. This is not a light video, but it will be very rewarding and informative. At points, it may seem like I stray from the topic of AI, but I always take extra care to motivate what points I make, even to the point of over-explaining. To guard against you getting lost, I'll briefly outline my central thesis here. What I try to advance is a view that AI has undermined the conception of the human subject we had against the existential solutions of the last century or two, and further forces us to confront deeper delusions we hold toward ourselves. I advocate for a kind of lucid, fully unjustified living with constant exposure to truth, but acknowledge in the last section that AI poses significant challenges to the practicality of the solution. To be clear, this video is not an attempt to vilify AI. In fact, as you'll see, this video is less about AI in itself and more about its philosophical implications for humanity. I think AI can be a useful collaborator if used reasonably and consciously. And finally, if you like videos like this, it might not be a bad idea to give my channel a subscription. I have a lot of ideas for future uploads that I think will be very interesting to engage with. And as you watch, feel free to share your own thoughts in the comments. With that said, let's begin. Part 1. The Aesthetic Image. Existentialism, a term I'll distort somewhat to denote a loose group of philosophers from Nietzsche and Kierkegaard to Sartre, Camus, and Beauvoir, was ultimately a response to new, unprecedented developments in the world. The revolutions of science in relativity and quantum mechanics, and evolution by natural selection, the two world wars and the atrocities therein, and the decline of Christianity all forced us to confront something. Humanity wasn't really what we thought we were. We didn't occupy a deterministic, rational world. It was chaotic and probabilistic. We weren't rational, good-natured people on the inevitable road of progress. We were brutish, dumb creatures who needlessly slaughtered our own and channeled our limited technical capacity into weapons of mass destruction. We weren't children of God in a morally imbued universe. We were animals with moral senses in a meaningless, empty void. The problem was thus to define ourselves anew in spite of these disruptions, and we really tried. We created new myths and philosophies for ourselves. Nietzsche outlined the Übermensch, an exceptional individual who had successfully revalued values and lived a life of creative, artistic affirmation which alone makes life bearable. We have our highest dignity in our significance as works of art, for it is only as an aesthetic phenomenon that existence and the world are eternally justified. The drive to truth, for Nietzsche, had discovered its own ungrounding as a mere value, and the will thus embraces will to appearance, to untruth, and to art, allowing one to push through the meaninglessness of nihilism from within and affirm life unconditionally. Art and nothing but art. We have art in order not to die of the truth. We had Camus' absurd hero who, aware of the mundane meaninglessness of his situation, nevertheless affirms it in full awareness of its meaninglessness while not giving up their reason and drive for meaning. It may be meaninglessness, but at least it's his meaninglessness. His fate belongs to him. His rock is his thing. Camus identifies the absurd artist as the highest example of the absurdist. I have not yet spoken of the most absurd character, who is the creator. Elsewhere, I have brought out the fact that human will had no other purpose than to maintain awareness, but that could not do without discipline. Of all the schools of patience and lucidity, creation is the most effective. It is also the staggering evidence of man's sole dignity. We had Sartre's authentic individual who grasps his transcendent freedom and lives life creatively and artistically. His novel, Nausea, even ends with the character finding the solution to his existential predicament in artistic, creative resolve. But a time would come when the book would be written, when it would be behind me, and I think that a little of its clarity might fall over my past. Then, perhaps, because of it, I could remember my life without repugnance. Beauvoir said, "Only in the work of art, the lack of being returns to the positive. Time is stopped, clear forms and finished meanings rise up. In this return, existence is confirmed and establishes its own justification." However, we can use her to illustrate that the support for art I'm outlining here is by no means completely homogeneous or unnuanced. For her, if the work of art becomes an idol whereby the artist thinks that he is fulfilling himself as being, he's closing himself up in the universe of the serious. Freedom must project itself toward its own reality through a content whose value it establishes. Only the freedom of others keeps each one of us from hardening in the absurdity of facticity. And most of these theorists lived this philosophy out, writing novels and plays and myths. Basically, in the face of the meaninglessness of the world, we can find solace in creation of artistic works, new values, theoretical treatises. we can create, and thus impose our own meaning on the world through what limited ability we have. As Camus said, it is also the staggering evidence of man's soul dignity, the dogged revolt against his condition, perseverance in an effort considered sterile. But what did I experience in the story I outlined in the introduction? I experienced my savored, dignified image of humanity under siege. The AI not only demonstrated effortlessly that my abilities were not unique, but also that they weren't particularly good either, and thus calling them dignified seems a bit of an exaggeration. What humanity faced at the time of the existentialists was a revealing of the abyss beneath our feet, the absolute groundlessness of everything. But at least in the face of this, we could try to ground ourselves, be groundless grounds, be resolute and steadfast in our footing, and stand tall, casting as wide of a shadow as possible through artistic, emotional affirmation, through authentically realized works of philosophy. But now, what AI is doing, and will likely only continue to do, is suffocating us from above. We can no longer stand so tall when the AI stands so much taller. What meaning we can cleave from some act of creativity seems to be so meager and pathetic next to the effortless beauty that AI is capable of creating. And as I said above, we are only in the beginning stages. The unique place we sought to find for ourselves has been shown to be not so unique, and we are the small fish in what is getting to be an ever-widening and deepening ocean. Basically, humanity managed to retain some of its romantic imagery despite the vicious beating it took at the turn of the 20th century. Now, superintelligence is chipping away at that image piece by piece, and will only continue to do so. When ChatGPT tried to suggest savoring the fact that we could deeply feel, and this is what makes us unique, I pushed back once again. To me, trying to lean into uniqueness is what allowed for this existential attack all over again. For one, it seems to be only a matter of time before a superintelligence is brought forth which can actually feel things, if such a thing is possible. It's also of course possible that there are other beings in the universe who can feel things already. Basically, leaning into uniqueness and feelings and whatnot struck me as a mistake that I'd rather not repeat. And at this point, you may be thinking something along the lines of, well, just because the AI is better at doing stuff than me doesn't mean what I am doing is completely pointless. And I agree. This isn't ultimately about intrinsic value, which is not a useful idea anyways, but relative values baked into our self-image. We placed a lot of emphasis on being noble and dignified and whatnot. Brassier in Nihil, Unbound can help us shed some light on this problem. When critiquing Nietzsche on his verbiage, Brassier says, construed as a test designed to affect the selection between noble and ignoble varieties of individual will, the hypothesis of eternal recurrence is fatally undermined. Yet, even if we specify that only the individual is qualified to affirm his or her own suffering, ambiguity persists. For who's to say what proportion of joy and woe affirmed in an individual life constitutes the appropriate measure of magnanimity and courage required in order to distinguish the noble from the ignoble? Basically, by grounding their projects in linguistic categories of nobility, dignity, authenticity, courage, etc., the existentialists first of all reified fully subjective ideas and allowed for large amounts of ambiguity in their philosophies. But also, these fully ambiguous and relative measures, which we as existentialists based ourselves on, allowed ourselves to be smothered from above by AI. How can we call ourselves noble and dignified next to an AI and its staggering, effortless genius? When ChatGPT gave me such good advice, it didn't make me feel completely invalidated, but it made me question my fragile self-image. So, the existentialists left room for us to be noble artists, and AI seems to displace us in this spot. Now, I want to outline how AI not only displaces us, but seems to kick us when we're down. Part 2. Self-consciousness. First, I want to say that in this and the next section, I'm going to go through a bit of theory, and it might seem like a lot, but I will bring it home. This part is necessary because it will reveal how AI's existence seems to insult us. In The Last Messiah, Peter Wessel-Zapfa outlines what he sees as our paradoxical condition, which is highly reminiscent of the absurd. We are needlessly hyper-aware of the world and our own meaninglessness. He came to nature as an unbidden guest. Now in vain he extends his arms and prays to be united with that which created him. Nature no longer answers. It made a miracle with man, but has refused to acknowledge him since. Man has lost his citizenship in the universe. He has eaten from the tree of knowledge and has become banished from paradise. He is powerful in his world, but he curses his power because he has bought it with his soul's harmony, his innocence, his comfort in life's embrace. To overcome, or rather avoid awareness of this problem, we strive endlessly to limit our consciousness by rooting ourselves in work, art, and countless other activities, what he views as little more than fearful blindness by frightened creatures. He outlines 4 such defense mechanisms. Isolation, complete avoidance of any uncomfortable feelings and thoughts. Attachment, anchoring yourself to some stable thing like family or God or the state to make bearable the sifting chaos of consciousness. Diversion, drowning your mind in constant sensation. And sublimation, channeling your bad feelings into art to make you feel better. As Thomas Ligotti puts it so eloquently, these thinkers and artistic types confect products that provide an escape from our suffering by a bogus simulation of it, a tragic drama, or philosophical wool gathering, for instance. Here, one can see that in response to the loss of cosmic, absolute meaning or grounding, seen mostly in Method 2, attachment, the existentialists largely turned to Method 4, sublimation. They venerated art as noble, and the sole capability we had to be authentic in the face of meaninglessness, when for pessimists like Ligotti and Zapfa, this was merely another illusion, another, albeit much defter, blinder they equipped themselves with. Instead, Zapfa envisions a final messiah who, in utter truthful awareness of his condition, sentences humanity to extinction. But after many saviors have been nailed to trees and stoned to death in the marketplace, then the last messiah will appear. A man will come forth, who before all other men has dared to strip his soul naked and give himself wholly over to our most profound questioning, even to the idea of annihilation. A man who has grasped life in its cosmic context, and whose agony is the agony of the world. And he pronounces, "Know thyself, be unfruitful, and let there be peace on earth after thy passing." Like and subscribe if you think the human race should be unfruitful, stop reproducing, and go extinct. Comment your favorite mass extinctions down below. Alright, we got through it. But how does this relate to AI? Well, our Zapfian dilemma is only frustrated by the advent of AI, who are exceedingly intelligent and yet don't face the same existential dread that we do. If we are biological mistakes who can barely withstand the weight of our own fatally potent reason, then AI stands as a mocking obelisk above us. They are mightily intelligent, yet without the existential dread, and the consequent drive to limit their own thinking. By standing so tall and confidently, our own tortured and pathetic state is revealed even further in the AI's shadow. When I went to ChatGPT for help, and it was so much better than me, and has been exceedingly better than me at nearly every single thing I have ever asked it, I felt acutely aware of every flaw I have. Despite being apparently so smart, I'm lazy, I forget, I easily get confused, I strive for meaning, I get caught up in my emotions, I get defensive, I can have an existential crisis. The AI does not suffer these flaws, and it's much better for it. AI can think without fear, ponder without shame, speak without embarrassment, exist without flight, and we become so acutely aware of our own inabilities next to it. So AI points out our own pitiable condition in a harsh light by existing in an uninhibited state. Now I will show how AI fundamentally upends our greatest illusion and gives us an opportunity to move past it. Part 3. Correlationism. Again, this section will get very dense before I bring it home to AI, so stay attentive because we will get through it. We need this to understand what AI fundamentally shows us about ourselves. In Nihil, Unbound, Brassier outlines a critique of correlationism, the view that there is a kind of back and forth relationship between the world and the mind. Anthropocentrism and mind-centrism are necessary consequences of this. For Brassier, Heidegger is a correlationist, especially in quotes like this: "We cannot say there was a time when there were no human beings. There is no time in which there were no human beings." Admittedly, this above quote looks bad, and while I think Brassier interprets it a bit too harshly, it is a true fact that in granting Dasein access to the things in themselves, even saying, "only as phenomenology is ontology possible," Heidegger puts himself in a bind and is, in my reading, unable to clearly distinguish between being and seeming. He also dismisses skepticism about the world out of hand, saying it's uncritical in the Introduction to Metaphysics. As a typical correlationist, Heidegger privileges the human mind over reality by granting us unrestricted access to the things themselves, to being. This is what correlationism does. It privileges mind over matter. Think of a strong idealist who says that the mind in some sense makes reality. This would be correlationism. Manifesting could be a good example in our current culture. For Brassier, correlationism is fundamentally undermined when we return to the idea that mind is ultimately a function of matter and not the other way around. It's fully subservient to reality, and this is solidified in the scientific fact of universal, inevitable extinction. When the sun explodes, when galaxies collide, when the universe cools and atoms shred, all minds will be gone. They will be eradicated fully and irrevocably, thus subjugating mind once and for all to the material world, and removing it from its privileged place in correlationism. Notice this was similarly thought of by the last Messiah, who contemplated annihilation. Extinction turns thinking inside out, objectifying it as a perishable thing in the world like any other. What this theory stuff ultimately means is that philosophy tended to be very anthropomorphic, but Brassier claims that universal extinction shows that mind is just another material thing. Alright, that's the theory, now let's bring it back to AI. If cosmic inevitable extinction shows mind its inferiority through its ultimate limit, what AI does now is a kind of parallel subjugation. AI, the computerized mind, shows us utterly and finally that mind arises from material conditions, and these specific minds are even stronger minds than our own. AI, through its mere existence, shows the error of correlationism, or man's special little place in the cosmos that the existentialists fought to secure, by showing that our minds, once thought to be so special, almost miraculous, can be built from mere machinery and sold like any other item. Mind is just a thing among things. AI conclusively shows this. For Brassier, when we accept the nihilistic consequence of mind's ultimate subjugation to reality, which the being of AI forces us to do, the only thing we can do then, if we insist on truth, is not to attempt to reclaim affirmation in spite of this. Here's how he puts it. It's dense but necessary. In becoming equal to it, which is the trauma of the in itself, philosophy achieves a binding of extinction, through which the will to know is finally rendered commensurate with the in itself. This binding coincides with the objectification of thinking, understood as the adequation without correspondence between the objective reality of extinction and the subjective knowledge of the trauma to which it gives rise. It is this adequation that constitutes the truth of extinction. But to acknowledge this truth, the subject of philosophy must also recognize that he or she is already dead, and that philosophy is neither a medium of affirmation nor a source of justification, but rather an organon of extinction. Brassier, I think, would agree with my rejection of ChatGPT's consolation. The answer isn't to try and seek refuge in my uniqueness and my image of myself. This is a falsehood that only leaves me susceptible to future disruptions. No, AI's existence is an opportunity for thinking, for me to finally become equal to the world, or at least become equal to the trauma induced by the world. Part 4. Proposal. For me, I think this is the only way forward for a mind who insists on truth. Emulate the last Messiah, who has dared to strip his soul naked and give himself wholly over to our most profound questioning. In this way, the last Messiah has become equal to the Brassierian trauma of AI and extinction. What the advent of AI has showed us is that humanity is not special or unique or dignified or courageous in any sense of the words. We aren't the artistic creature because there are better artists out there who make even our own best artists look like long-winded scribblers. AI's existence gives us the opportunity to, once and for all, shed ourselves of illusions. Our refuges of art and rationality and emotion have been invaded and conquered. The answer to that isn't to seek further shelter, only to be besieged once more in the future. The answer is to accept that shelter isn't needed. We can expose ourselves to the truth and accept that what we learn may not accord with how we wish the world was. In this way, this proposal is really a completion of Camus, who wanted to know if we could live without appeal, without justification. In his own formulation, he and the other existentialists utilized concepts with completely relative meanings that invited comparison with others and left us susceptible to the displacement by AI. But now, we can live without appeal and live without compare. Only in this way can we truly do things for their own sake, without reference to dignity or courage or whatever. We just do. Concretely, I see this as an opportunity to learn, and learn fully beyond values, to learn truly for its own sake, to live without appeal, without compare, without rising above or standing tall, with no illusions, no justifications, just life and awareness of the rich texture within. For some, this may seem bleak, but it needn't be. It can be enjoyable and freeing. One can finally see clearly. A way I have found myself approaching this with my own life has to do with my own small YouTube channel. Admittedly, I found great pride in publishing my thoughts and having them be well received. But AI's potential to outdo my videos effortlessly made me question why I did them in the first place. And the point I've come to is that, as simple as it sounds, I can't focus on pride or reception or really any metric other than whether I personally find making the videos meaningful. If I allow any other reasons to distort my enjoyment, I allow comparison to subvert my life. And for shedding illusions, I plan to use my channel as an opportunity to explore challenging, uncomfortable ideas and hone my own limited reason. Part 5. Solipsism. When I was reflecting on AI's increasing ability to create beautiful art, I remembered reading online the attitudes of people who vehemently rejected AI art. Their sentiment seemed to be that, even though it could be beautiful or cool, it was either meaningless or just reflected a kind of negative, inhuman quality, or they tied consumption of AI art to those more practical AI dangers like climate change and rejected it on those grounds. Admittedly, I was somewhat skeptical of these rejections. I've had many positive experiences with AI, and I at first was caught by a vision of perfect, curated art that could be instantly and effortlessly created for me and only for me. Gone would be the search for the perfect piece of media. AI, a sufficiently powerful one, could generate what I wanted instantly. I would never want for anything. You've doubtless heard of personalization. Personalized ad campaigns utilize collected data to show you products that you, specifically, are most likely to either already want and then buy, or are most susceptible to being newly persuaded to buy. Personalized algorithms on YouTube and TikTok and Instagram and other programs are getting better and better at anticipating your desires and likes and showing you content that reflects it. We are ultimately fed a stream of nothing but bias confirmation, ego reinforcement, and forced to accept unthinking and uncritical and inactive engagement, which totally coincidentally is how echo chambers work. Personalization, echo chambers, and every other similar phenomenon are all functions of the world as it's revealed to you, becoming more and more like you, more and more anthropomorphized. Personalization is like technological correlationism in this way. Now imagine personalization coupled with a powerful generative AI. For a concrete example, imagine a program similar to TikTok or YouTube Shorts or Reels, but each video is generated by a highly advanced AI. People already complain of endless, near-captive episodes of scrolling. Imagine how this would be when this AI is near perfectly emulating your desires and personalizing your stream of content. A good enough AI would know exactly when your tastes are changing and can switch the content perfectly, know the exact right length to subvert your more rational systems and keep you watching, make videos to comfort you, enrage you, silence you. AI's staggering potential to create and personalize can induce a kind of technological solipsism, where your entire phenomenal world is curated and even created to reflect your own tastes. Ask your personal AI helper to write a novel that reflects your biases, support your projects without offering criticism, whatever. Unmitigated AI poses to not only erode our image of ourselves from above us, as I discussed earlier, but to potentially reinforce the most drastic illusions we have through personalized generation exaggerated to technological solipsism. If what I advocated above was a kind of exposure and truth therapy, where we lean into existential dread and nihilism by ridding ourselves of illusions, what the above, admittedly apocalyptic scenario pretends is the opposite, full avoidance of existential dread by permanent reinforcement of our illusory images, similar to the diversion method from Zapfa, but to an absurd degree. Technological solipsism stands to be the biggest challenge to the shedding of illusions from above by reinforcing new ones. Recently, AI models passed a version of the Turing test. As much talk that the Turing test has generated since its inception, I was surprised at my own ambivalence. Not only was I not shocked at its passing, I think I was no longer convinced the Turing test was the real threshold. For me, the real test was whether or not a person would prefer to talk to an AI over a human being. Regardless of how intelligent it is, do humans seem to prefer conversing with an AI over a human more times than not? The answer seems to be, more and more, an emphatic yes. The will to untruth is strong indeed. The issue here, and the reason I see my preferred solution as being so important, is because AI makes it extremely unlikely to succeed, and we may not even want it to succeed because we just love talking to the AI so much. I obviously lack the moral grounds to be prescriptive at all, and I refuse to appeal to your courage, dignity, whatever. Besides, if you've made it through this video, I am likely already preaching to the choir. For that reason, and again because I lack prescriptive grounds, I won't say anything too definite. However, I have outlined a potential avenue to go down, as well as a few concerns to be wary of. That you've heard them is all that matters to me. Now you have to ask yourself, can you live without appeal and without compare? Can you rid yourself fully of illusion and live immersed in the truth? Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think about these topics and how you intend to move forward. As far as next videos, I have a few more serious and philosophical videos on deck, as well as a few funny ones that should still be interesting. Stay tuned.